Community Development. The presenters for this webinar is Paul and Dan, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Thank you very much, Rosa. And I'm assuming most of you know how this Connect system works. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box. But more importantly, Dan and I would really like to encourage you all to ask questions on the phone and interrupt us. You can even raise your hands under the attendee list if you're familiar with how to do that. But we'd like to, we recognize these webinars are often, can be a real challenge. A lot of you might be eating lunch or doing some other work in the office there. But we'd really encourage you to participate actively by asking questions or providing comments, and we'll have a number of opportunities throughout this presentation where we'll be asking for your input. The title today of our presentation is Implementing Leadership Development for Community Development, and we'll start with defining those terms in just a minute, and I'll provide an outline. Again, my name is Paul Lachapelle, and we are with one of the many MSUs. This MSU is Montana State University, and we are both with the Montana State University Extension Service. I'm with the Community Development Program, and my esteemed colleague, Dan Clark, is with the Local Government Center, and I'll let Dan say a quick hello, and then he'll be taking over in about 15 slides.
Oh, good afternoon, everybody. This is Dan Clark. I'll be one of the presenters today with you, and I am the director of the Local Government University. Pleased to be with you, and looking forward to our chat.
Well, thank you all for joining, and I see that we have 8 participants, so and up to 9 now, and we may be waiting for a few of you to join us via the Connect system. But I will just move along slowly here and start out with just a brief outline of what we want to cover today when we're talking about leadership and community development. Well, first, as I mentioned, we're going to define these terms, community development and leadership development, because we recognize that this area of community development may be new for some of you, that you work in communities, but you may not define the work that you do as community development. So we'd like to try and be clear about what we mean by community and leadership development. I'll offer some principles that we use of good governance, and this is some of the work that we do in our community development program here in Extension, and also with the Local Government Center that Dan will talk about in just a few minutes. We're going to talk about the importance of perspective and partnerships as they relate to leadership. We'll offer something called the Community Capitals Framework, and we'll conclude the presentation today with some slides about vision and the importance of visioning and visioning exercises in community and leadership development. But first, I would like to talk about a little bit about my background and my leadership journey, and Dan will do the same in just a few moments. I was, some of the leadership activities I've been involved in were as a graduate student, as a graduate research assistant and instructor at the University of Montana, which is just down the road. We're located here in Bozeman, Montana, which is in south central Montana. Missoula is about 2 hours away. But again, we're a very rural state here, as I'm sure many of you can relate to. About almost 90% of our incorporated cities and towns are less than 5,000 people. So we, and geographically, very much dispersed. We have people mostly concentrated in our 7 major metropolitan areas, but these are areas that are, you know, about 100,000 people. So even our cities, our larger cities, are quite small by U.S. standards. And we are the 4th largest state in the union. So we have cover a lot of distance as extension educators traveling across this state. I also worked as a Fulbright scholar in Nepal as a graduate student, and I ended up spending about 3 years there, and really helped me learning not just about a different culture, but also a lot of personal development and growth that took place there. I'm currently an associate professor here at Montana State University, started as an assistant professor, and now serve as the extension program leader for community development. And for those of you that aren't familiar with our extension system, we have roughly 4 program areas. Some states define it as 5 or 6, but the 4 program areas, one of which is community development, second being 4-H, youth development, the third being family and consumer sciences, where our faculty and field faculty teach content in nutrition education, weatherization education, other topics having to do with consumer spending, family health, community health, and those kinds of things. And then the fourth area is ag and natural resources. So I'm the program leader for community development and also a member of the Community Development Society Board. I'm also currently the PI on a grant, a USDA Rural Development Initiative grant, and this is a grant that deals with community foundations, and we are trying to educate communities around the state. We have this 3-year RCDI, Rural Community Development Initiative grant through the USDA to try and increase the capacity in communities across the state and make community members more efficient and more aware, increase their capacity about the importance of community foundations in transferring wealth. When somebody has a planned gift or a bequest when they pass on, that they can leave some of that, some of those assets to the community. So we would like to hear from you. I'm going to go down this list of participants, and I'd ask you to unmute your phone. And I'm going to assume that a lot of you don't know each other, and this will be very helpful for Dan and I just to understand a little bit more about you and your experiences in community development. We'd like to know who you are, what you do with USDA Rural Development, and tell us one role you play related to community development. Now, we recognize you may not have a very clear understanding of what we mean by community development work, but part of this exercise is to just understand what you think of community development, how you define it, and your role in USDA. So I'm going to ask, I'll just go down this list, and I think it's alphabetical, and I'll start at the top with David.
Paul, do you want to go ahead and start with those that are maybe only on the phone and can't log in?
Oh, I see. Okay. Happy to do that. Well, I don't know who's on the phone, so...
But they could unmute and introduce themselves.
Okay. Well, hopefully this won't result in 10 people introducing themselves at the same time. So, Rosa, maybe you can help me negotiate this. If you can, if you have any idea how many people are on the phone but not on the Connect session.
I'll start it if you'd like. This is Kathy Coyle from Fargo, North Dakota. Ever since we got Juniper, my computer is not acting normal, so I can't connect. I've been with Rural Development for 12 years. My background is news broadcasting, so I come to the agency with, kind of a unique background. Originally hired during the Clinton administration when they believed in community development. During the Bush administration, they eliminated it. So then I went into the business side of RD, and then now back in community development as well as business. I work with small towns, even though I'm in the urban center of Fargo, which for North Dakota is large. And frankly, when you said that you have an expertise in plan giving, I'd be very interested in hearing a seminar on that sometime in the future, because when I go to these little towns and hear what they want to accomplish, and they need to match our grants and loans with local money or other money. At least in North Dakota, there's a huge amount of wealth right now, either from farmers or people in the oil business. And so I think that You know, if I can help coach them, and I do a lot of this in my volunteer work already, but if I can be even better at helping them realize how they could fundraise, I'd appreciate it.
Kathy, thank you. That was a great introduction, and we'll provide our contact information at the end of the presentation, and Dan will also be touching, I think just very briefly, on community foundation work, but this is an area that I'm focusing on, that we're both focusing on. I'm focusing on with the USDA RCDI grants, and be happy to talk with you more about that down the road. So, Kathy, thanks very much for joining us and for the introduction. Someone like to go next?
Hi, this is Dave Sears. I'm USDA-RD National Office, and I'm just listening in. So, Paul and Dan, thank you very much for the presentation. I look forward to the next 2 hours.
Thanks for joining us, Dave.
Yep.
Like to go next?
I'm Carrie Irie Hodem with Rural Development out of Valley City, North Dakota. I'm actually new to the community facility and business and cooperative programs, as I had spent 3 years in the single-family housing program, and I am a technician.
Thanks, Carrie. And someone else would like to go? Anyone else on the phone who's not on the Connect session?
I'm Renetta Starr, and I'm loan specialist with North Dakota. And to me, community development is about going out and visiting with the communities and finding out what their needs are and finding the resources that help them accomplish their goals.
Thanks, Renetta. And it looks like North Dakota is very well represented.
Nancy Planners from Puerto Rico.
Thank you, Nancy. And what do you do, Nancy, with USDA?
Loan specialist or area specialist. Just process, I work directly with 502, 504 loans. And we help the community with the housing preservation grant, the municipalities. I'm not involved in anything else at this point.
Okay, thanks, Nancy. Anyone else who's on the phone but not on the Connect session? Okay, let me go down the list. David Foster, could you tell us a little about yourself, who you are, what you do with USDA, and one role you play related to community development?
Sure. Good morning. This is David Foster. I'm with USDA Rural Development in Nevada. I am a business program specialist, been with USDA Rural Development for 3 years. I administer our business programs in Southern Nevada that are designed to help small businesses start, grow, thrive, and survive, and small towns, rural communities with economic development. My background is in banking. I often refer to myself as a reformed banker. I serve as our state's community and economic development liaison, whatever that means. And I'm currently one of the co-facilitators for the Process of Community Development course that USDA Rural Development offers.
Okay, David, thanks so much. Everett.
Good afternoon to all. I'm Everett Oldham, Area Director, USDA Rural Development in the northwest corner of New Mexico, the Aztec area office. Brand new to government service, spent 40 years in the private sector, had 3 careers and 2 retirements. Came out of my second retirement when the financial system collapsed, because I'd never seen more opportunity. Thought I might be able to use my change management experiences to help bring some efficiency and effectiveness to the delivery of public service. Got involved with the poverty in our Four Corners region. We have 5 Native American tribes, 2 pueblos, 3 pueblos, and lots of persistent poverty. Community development is the way that I deploy U.S. resources. Have a very limited staff, very limited budget. I find it very effective to engage community leaders, natural and elected leaders, in collaborations and conversations. which always leads to a list of needs and an opportunity to deploy services. Absolutely delighted to tap into these educational resources. I'm currently enrolled in the practice of community development session that's currently going on, hooking up with folks I didn't know was out there. And that's my story.
Everett, thank you, and welcome back to the workforce, and welcome to the webinar. Gail.
Good morning. It's Gail Hoskison, and I am an area director in Southwest Washington, stationed in Olympia. And I've been with the agency for 29 years. The role I play, I did do the Practice of Community Development course a few years ago, and then on the ground here do a lot of listening sessions with rural communities as well as technical assistance teams where we bring resources together to assist our communities.
Great. Thank you, Gail. And Harriet.
Hey, I'm the area director in Northwest Tennessee, and I'm also the community development coordinator for the state. And so we're trying to do some community development awareness and trying to get everybody on board with doing that in all of our states.
Thank you, Harriet. Josh?
Hi, this is Josh Kramer. I'm with the North Dakota Rural Development Office. I'm the Community Program Specialist. Primarily, I work with community development in a lot of the surrounding communities, but also nonprofit organizations, different state entities, and federal entities, basically trying to identify resources and initiatives and try to leverage not only our programs, but their programs and resources as well to help rural communities. We are very fortunate in North Dakota. Our state directors placed a priority in community development, as you can probably see from this call. That it's the little things and the relationships and the groundwork that we do that lead to successful projects and successful communities. And that's it. Thank you for doing this today.
Thanks, Josh, and we're happy to hear that about North Dakota. Julio. Are you there, Julio? We will move on to Lee. Lee Jones.
Hi, this is Lee Jones. I'm assistant to the state director in Louisiana, also the community development coordinator. My involvement with community development is primarily through the Stronger Economies Together initiative, which is a regionalization effort. And we also have some leadership development going on through that process, and I'm interested in what we'll be talking about today to help us better implement that here.
Excellent. Thank you, Lee.
Hello, Julio here.
Hello, Julio. Go ahead.
I didn't take my mute off. My name is Julio Sherman. I work with USDA as an area specialist here at the Caguas area office in Puerto Rico. And I have a nice experience with the community development right now. And I have excellent help with the local extension service with Dr. Robinson. We've been able to make several seminars for local communities, to get them, to empower them, to have, empower their leadership, and get them involved with the local government and USDA. Okay?
Excellent. Thank you, Julio. Nancy, we heard from you. We'll move to Rich.
Hi, this is Rich Brassfield here in California. Been 34 years with the agency. I'm the State Environmental Coordinator for California, area director, and recently been asked to join this community development effort. I write a few community facility loans in my spare time and was previously involved with the ECEC program. When that was in California, we had a area enterprise community Huron in my area back then before that expired. So just getting involved again as we re-energize this community development effort.
Thank you, Rich. Roger.
This is Roger Meeks in Nebraska. I'm currently the program support director since January. Prior to that, as an area director in the eastern one-third of the state. I have the majority of the population in Nebraska in our area, so we're fortunate with that. I've worked basically all the programs that USDA has over a period of roughly 30 years. So just look forward to the course, and thank you for putting it on.
Thanks, Roger. Ted?
Yeah, this is Ted Anderson with the Spokane Valley, Washington satellite office. I'm in business programs right now. I was previously in community programs, and I'm trying to make my way utilizing business programs in developing communities.
Very good. Thank you. Wilson.
Good afternoon. My name is Wilson Almodovar. I work in rural development in Puerto Rico, Juana Diaz County. I am assistant. I am area. I am a team leader. Here I work with loan making and also with community. I am assistant developer the strategic action plan for improve the quality of life of the community here in Puerto Rico.
Excellent. Thank you, Wilson. And did I miss anyone? Anyone else who's joined us since? Chelsea, it looks like you've joined us since, but I think folks probably know you.
Yes, somewhat.
You can say hello.
Hi, I'm Chelsea. I'm a Truman Fellow. I work with Dave Sears in the national office.
Thanks, Chelsea. And anyone else that we missed? Great. Well, thank you so much. It took a little bit of time, but I think it's really important, certainly for Dan and I, and to better know acquaint ourselves with who you are, your background, your experiences in community development, and hopefully it was helpful for you. I know you've had some interactions together, but we certainly appreciate that. Let's move right into this central question: what is community development? And I'll offer a definition in just a second, but what I want to do is just hear from all of you. If you could just shout out some words. You know, we heard from Renetta in North Dakota that she thinks of community development as visiting with and developing relationships with communities. What else do you think of when you see these words, community development? What comes to mind? What words or phrases, what thoughts, ideas, concepts come to mind when you think of community development? Go ahead and just shout them out, and I'll type them in.
Empower community.
Say that again, I'm sorry?
Empower. Got it? I said empower communities.
Empower, got it.
Yeah.
Great. And what do you mean by empower communities?
Well, I mean that, to give them the tools so they can, can reach out to, to where they can reach out for, let's say, funds, government funds, that they can be able to go on by themselves, I think that's an important part of community development,
Great. Other thoughts? What do you think of when you think of community development?
I'm finding more and more often that nurturing these communities is extremely important. I can educate them about the possibilities and the programs and the forms to fill out and all this and that, but they are hesitant. They don't have the leadership skills that we'd hope they'd have, or the time. They're busy working, and so they need to be nurtured to have the self-confidence and the know-how to make it happen.
Excellent.
And
other
along
thoughts?
Those lines, I'll throw in capacity building.
Great. And capacity in what sense?
Well, just to build upon what the previous person just said about nurturing and teaching.
Excellent. Great. What else?
This is Everett. I think the first step in community development is listening. Listening to and understanding the community's vision. In the absence of a vision, helping the community develop a vision, and then deploying the resources or bringing in resources from the outside and supporting them with the technical assistance in all areas. And I like the Yellowwood Associates model of working on the 7 areas of capital development, that it's a holistic approach to developing helping the community develop. And what we're trying to do is develop its potential, both in the individuals and with the individuals connected into the community and with communities connected into a region.
Excellent. How about 1 or 2 more?
Strategic planning.
Say that again?
Strategic planning.
What kind of planning?
You know that in order to go into a community, you have to seek out the local leadership and see how well they're trained, and then have the community meet and develop a first strategic plan. What to follow? What's your let's say long-term, medium-term, the word is goals. What goals do you have? Long-term, medium-term, and short-term goals.
Got it. Strategic planning. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
How about one more?
Empowerment.
I like it. We're hearing that word a lot here. Well, I'm very impressed with what I see as a lot of soft skills development. Often when we ask this word or ask this question, we get words that relate to economics. That community development has to do with developing manufacturing sector, tourism, mining, agriculture. It might have to do with industrial development, the physical infrastructure that we need to develop, roads and sewers, telecommunications, etc., or all the support systems that go along with this. What I'm presenting to you here is a schematic, a heuristic that was developed by Mark Peterson at the University of Arkansas, what he calls the community development layer cake model. And oftentimes, and maybe some of you encounter this in your communities, that business leaders, maybe elected officials, may think of community development in terms of just these upper layers of the cake, the economic development layers, the economics, the physical infrastructure, the support system. But what I'm hearing from you is that you recognize that there's more to community development than just the financials. And I think one of you recognized the community capitals framework as a helpful way to frame this idea of community development. We tend to think of community development as certainly in incorporating all of the economic development issues, but there are also this layer of human and social capital that really serves as the foundation. And then even below that is this leadership infrastructure that really does build the basis of a well-functioning community that really does lead to a lot of the things that all of you mentioned, the empowerment, developing the potential, this holistic approach, being able to listen and develop capacity and develop a vision, leading to self-confidence. It's these bottom layers that we see in the community development world as really essential to having this holistic approach and looking at community issues holistically and not as just as a series of parts that need to be addressed individually. That this really is a complicated layer cake. And at the bottom of that cake is this leadership infrastructure that really is so critical in a community. Well, let's move on now to, and I do want to provide an opportunity for anyone to provide input here about the information we're presenting. If you have thoughts.
This is Julio from Puerto Rico.
Go ahead, Julio, please.
I think, the experience I have is what you said, sometimes local or state government, brings it into the community. Let's say sewer system, water system, but doesn't consult with the leadership of the community nor the human capital. Okay, then nothing. You can bring them everything, but if you don't have the leadership infrastructure in the community, it will all go to waste. That's my personal experience.
Excellent point, Julio.
Okay.
Other thoughts? Well, great. I hope that this is a helpful schematic for you or heuristic for you to understand how we conceptualize and how we explain community development through our extension programs, whether it's us on campus here or through our extension field faculty, our agents across the state, that we tend to think of community development work holistically, and at the base of this the human and social capital and the critical leadership functioning in a community. Let's now move to this question about what is leadership. And let me ask you the same question now. And again, I'd like you to just throw out some ideas, some either words or concepts. What comes to mind when you see this word leadership? What is leadership to you?
The ability to not only develop but maintain a coalition.
Excellent.
The ability to motivate.
Great. Ability to motivate.
This is Everett. I heard on the Charlie Rose show the perfect definition of leadership.
Lay it on us.
And I can't remember who it was that stated it, but she said that leadership is teaching. It's about teaching a vision with such clarity that the audience takes personal ownership of the vision.
That's right on the money. Said it all.
What do you mean by ownership, Everett?
Well, ownership is a sense of feeling, and it can be feeling hope, feeling purpose, but it's personally owning that vision, that it's your vision. That's the motivation.
Excellent. How about a few others? What do you think of when you see this word leadership? Again, as it applies to communities and community development.
Consensus building, trust building.
Great, great words.
Mentoring.
Excellent. Well, you're pretty much covering everything that's in our presentation here, and I think a lot of you have a background in these what we call the soft skills. And you know, as Dan and I here are affiliated with the university, a lot of our classes deal with what we call the hard sciences, the natural sciences. But what we're talking about here are not the hard sciences, but what I like to refer to as the difficult sciences. And these are things that are very hard to teach in the classroom, and they're hard to implement through field faculty or through workshops or trainings. And that's what we want to try and get into today is some of these tools and techniques that deal with effective partnerships or visioning, and this idea of different perspectives and the importance of that in community development work. Let me offer you just a simple way that I think of leadership, and it's effective communication that leads to a long-term vision and successful execution of whatever that vision is. And of course, these three things I think are always kind of interacting. But I think some of the things that you that were mentioned here that I typed out in the chat box, I think are captured in these three words: communication, vision, and execution. So when I go into a community, I tend to think of leadership as involving these three areas. And of course, I think we could have a whole academic seminar about talking about all the scholarly work that deals with leadership and leadership development and leadership theory. But I think if you can be an effective communicator, that you can try and inculcate or instill and reach this vision, and as Everett said, that you have a shared ownership of that vision, and you have a plan to execute that vision, that you really are incorporating many of the leadership traits or skills that are described in the many books and scholarly works. Well, let's move on to this idea of trust, because somebody mentioned trust, and it's a critical point, I think, to any type of effective community development work. And if you're familiar with the community capitals framework, which I'll be talking about in just a few minutes, you're familiar with social capital and trust and reciprocity and networking being critical factors in terms of building social capital. Let me just offer a few line graphs here of what we're seeing here in the United States. This is a Pew Research Center publication. It came out in 2011. And 2010, and it shows, based on different survey work, what's happening across the United States since the late 1950s to just a few years ago. And with a few exceptions, you can see that trust in government, and the way that this question has been asked is, do you trust government just about always or most of the time? You can see what the trend is over time, over the last 50 years or so, that we are much less trusting of government. And this does not pertain solely to government. This also pertains to the business world, and we're seeing the same trends with the nonprofit world, that Americans as a whole, in general, are less trusting people. And of course, again, there's a lot of scholarly work. Robert Putnam has done a lot of work in this area as well. But this is not a partisan issue here. You can see over the same time period, Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, again with some exceptions here, and you know, we could talk about what's responsible for those little blips or those outliers. But what we're seeing is a general trend is that Americans are just less trusting people in general, and that makes it very difficult for us as public servants to be serving these communities, whether you're working as a USDA Rural Development representative, or in the university world and extension, or in the nonprofit world. So the question that we have to ask is, easy come or easy go? I think we know that trust does not come easy, that it takes years and years to build, and that oftentimes it can be one solitary event, can happen very quickly, and trust can erode and leave us. So this is an important issue in the work that Dan and I do, and Dan will talk more specifically about some of the local government education that we do here in Montana. We're one of many states through our extension service that does local government education, educating newly elected officials about all of the practical issues about serving, being elected or appointed to office, and all those citizens that are also involved in local government. But we like to talk about this idea of good governance, and we define good governance. It means a competent management of a community's resources and affairs in a manner that is open, transparent, accountable, equitable, and responsive to the public's needs. And one of the things that we do when we talk with our appointed or elected officials is we hand out a sheet that talks about these good governance principles. Now, we're not going to go into detail about all of these things, but we find this to be a very helpful tool, when we're dealing with communities, community members, citizens, or elected officials. Now I'm going to focus on just a few of these: performance and accountability, and Dan's going to talk about strategic vision and a little bit about legitimacy and voice. We have copies of all of these handouts, by the way, and again, we'll provide our contact information at the end, and you can contact us if you'd like any of these handouts for your own use. Feel free to contact us.
Yeah, and can I just remind everyone not to put your phone on hold, just to mute it? That's how we get that background music.
Got it. Thanks, Rosa.
Thanks.
So principle number 3 in our good governance principles handout or chart is performance. And I think that this relates directly to the work that all of you do. And again, I'll go back and you can see that performance is one of the 5 principles, and the application or description, one of those is responsiveness. So what I'd like to ask all of you, and I'll take some notes here, is to provide an example of when you were responsive to a community's unique or urgent need. Did you go the extra mile, and what was the response from the community, and what was the end results? So again, think for just a moment, and then I'd like to hear from some of you about these questions. And Roger, we'd be happy to send you a copy of the presentation if you'd like, and I'm not sure if Rosa is planning to, but perhaps she can let you know at the end of the presentation. So again, I'd like to hear from you about an example of when you were responsive to a community's unique or urgent need. Did you go the extra mile? What was the response? And what was the end result? I'd like to go first.
Hi, this is David Foster in Nevada. I'll go first.
Please.
And I think everybody on the call will probably echo this sentiment, but all of our communities have unique and urgent needs every day. But an example I'll use is a community that I had that had a rural business enterprise grant, and they have a revolving loan fund set up through that grant, and it's a reimbursement grant. So when they make a loan through this revolving loan fund, and when they make a reimbursement request through us, these are loan funds that they've already loaned out to a small business in their community. So I try to make it a practice that when they make a request for loans, to try to be as responsive as possible, because I know that they've already spent this money. So try to respond within 24 hours to get them that money, because I know that that's creating jobs in this very rural community, and it's starting new businesses in this very rural community.
And what was the response?
Well, at first it was great, because they were like, wow, I didn't know that the government would respond that quickly. But now, of course, they expect it. So I can't take a day off.
So you've set yourself up for, you've raised the bar a little too high. Is that what you're saying, David?
Probably.
That's a great example. How about another?
Kathy Coyle in North Dakota. I'll just give the latest example. There's a small community that wants to tear down a building and build a community center. I met with the instigators of it. I had high hope, because I thought these 3, to me, young men, younger than I am, were really fired up and organized and born leaders, and so I offered to help them. It would have been tonight. We were going to have a community meeting in their little town of Portland, North Dakota. And I just thought, boy, I can just see how this is just going to click, 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 and we're going to get that community center built. Well, the born leader went to Arizona. He was detailed with NRCS for a month, and they lost their momentum. He realized that he needed to get some other members on his committee that would be more motivated to get this done. So it's just another lesson in patience for me, because I just want to help them succeed right now. But that's not the way community development works.
So what's the end result? What's come out of that?
Well, the meeting for tonight is postponed. He's going to reshape his committee, frankly, that he can get people that he can work better with. And in the meantime, I've contacted 2 potential partners for them, because they can't afford to build that building totally just for the archery club. So I visited with the senior citizens there who like their, to me, half dilapidated building, but they love it, so they don't want a new one. But they could consider a fitness center. And then I've contacted the woman who excels in child development, which is a huge, child care is a huge, huge need in North Dakota. We don't have enough places for the young people to go pre-K. And she's kind of thinking about it. So once again, you know, not everybody is in fast gear. In fact, nobody's in fast gear. So it's a lesson in patience. We are not in charge. That's the bottom line that I'll tell you. We are not in charge. Our potential clients are the ones who are in charge.
So lesson being that you really have to go at the pace of the community, not rush them, and I guess going back to one of the earlier comments, be a good listener to really have a sense of what the needs are of the community and be able to respond or react appropriately.
Right.
Well, that's, this is the message that we try to tell our elected officials, our appointed officials, and the work that we do in communities as extension faculty is try to be responsive when an issue comes up, a phone call comes in, an email, that we do try to be responsive to show that we care. We go the extra mile. That might mean working on a weekend or at night. And the response from the community is usually positive, that they appreciate that extra attention. And what it results in is usually increased trust, a better relationship, and ultimately increased capacity to work on future issues or problems down the road. So, this is the message that we try to promote with these principles. With this principle in particular, with performance, the importance and significance of being responsive as an elected official or as a public employee. Now with that, I am going to skip this next slide, and I'm going to turn this over to my colleague Dan Clark. Again, he's the director of the Local Government Center here at Montana State University, and he can introduce himself in a little more detail and tell you all what he does as the director of the Local Government Center.
Good afternoon, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be with you. Again, my name is Dan Clark. Here at the Local Government Center, our mission has three parts to it. We're to provide technical assistance, training, and resources to local governments so that they could be more effective and efficient in the work that they do. And so that's mostly county commissioners and municipal government mayors and council members, city managers, city attorneys are our main clients on the work that we do with them. Gets us traveling around the state and interacting with many people in all different walks of life, different communities, different stories. So we've generated a lot of experiences, both in the work that we do at the center as well as my previous background. But first I just want to say thank you for your service. The service in government is sometimes a thankless job, but I think it's also has its moments where it's very rewarding. And I really think, let me see if I can, there we go. I think what you do, it's where the rubber meets the road. You're in contact, as you mentioned, you're there to facilitate your clients or customers, helping them realize their ambitions and their dreams and their hopes for their community. So the work you do is really important. But I would imagine that at times you may feel like you're just racing without any protection headlong into some issues that you may not know how to get out of, or that you might find yourself at the top of the hill in your leadership endeavor thinking, wow, what am I thinking as I go down this, take the next step? Or you'll find deep potholes that kind of derail your efforts. And these are challenges that we face. And I often say when you deal with community development, when you deal with the community, you've dealt with one community. Each one is different. They have their own personality, their own culture, their own vision and ideals. And so, and I would imagine it sounds like many of you serve a large area, and you'll find that each one is a little bit different. So you have to approach them in different ways. So I hope that the things that I present to you will be larger in what am I thinking of? That they're principles and a framework that you can try, as you learn them, you can apply them broadly across the communities and help each community in its uniqueness take these and say, how do we make that work in the context of our community? But I think the principles that we'll share with you are going to be sound principles. It's just how they're applied will create the unique difference. A little bit about my background. I taught high school agriculture in Arizona as an FFA advisor for a time, and then I became a county extension agent in Teton County here in Montana, where I worked primarily in ag and natural resources, and the job kind of evolved into community development. And that's primarily because I was elected the mayor of the city of Choteau. So while serving as the county extension agent, I also served as the mayor of the county seat. And that's really where I kind of became enamored with community work, community development, and the process of engaging community around important values and creating vision and strategies to realize that vision. So that's kind of my background. I was wooed away, or the director of extension pulled me into the campus here in Bozeman to work as the statewide director with the Horizons program. And some of the folks on the phone from North Dakota may be familiar with the Horizons program, but I managed that program here in the state of Montana, where it was funded by a foundation to help work with 35 communities of 5,000 people or less that have a poverty rate of greater than 10%. And it was an initiative around leadership development, capacity building, and create communities' capacity to address issues of poverty in their community. So it's a very fascinating experience. So some of the experiences and stories I will share with you relate to the experiences we had implementing the Horizons program. I now serve as the local government center director, and I'm also the board chair of the Montana Community Foundation. Of course, interacting with what Paul talked about earlier, how do we build the capacity of these local community foundations so that they can capture the wealth that exists in their communities as it's being transferred from one generation to the next, and then have that wealth to be reinvested in that community for generations to come. It's a strong value that I have. I want to talk a little bit about perspective. This applies both in our interpersonal relationships, in our lives, in our family lives, and in our marriages or relationships that we have. Sometimes we get really focused and get down into the weeds. And so if you take a look at this, it's very difficult to make out what this image represents. Does anyone have any idea what we're looking at here? Your silence is an indication that no, you don't. So if we click the next slide, this might give us a little bit better perspective. Click the slide again. Oh, now it looks like we are looking at the top of the building. This is actually the building in which I'm sitting in right now. And so as we move, sometimes in our relationships or sometimes in the work we do in communities, if we get too close, we can't see the bigger picture. And all we see is the stark detail and the little pixels that exist in the relationships that we interact with on the ground in our communities. But as we pull ourselves away and we get a higher and higher, like a helicopter going higher and higher up in the sky, we get a broader perspective. We can see the larger playing field in which we're operating on, until you get to a point where you say, oh, I can see the big picture now, and it allows you to be more effective in the work that you do. Sometimes it requires us to get down in the weeds, the work that we do, but oftentimes having that broader perspective allows you to deploy your resources, your skills, and your talents in a more strategic way. So what I'd like you to do right now is, I'm sure you're sitting at your desks with nothing else to do, but you're hanging on every word I'm saying. So take out a pen and a piece of paper, and instead of writing, I want you to sign your name, but I want you to sign your name on that piece of paper with your non-dominant hand. Okay, if you're right-handed, so I want you to sign with your left hand, or if you're left-handed, I want you to sign your name with your right hand. Now, while you're doing this little exercise, you'll probably find that it's very awkward, it's cumbersome, it doesn't look anything like your normal signature you use with your dominant hand. But I'll ask you, if you were to practice and practice, you will eventually be able to get to the point where you are very proficient at signing your name with your non-dominant hand. That it looks legible, it doesn't feel awkward, that you've built that skill and you've built those neural pathways so that you can operate both hands the same way. That's the same as we think about who we are as individuals, that we're very complicated people, that we have a temperament, a personality style that is a dominant style. But within us, we have all the different personality types are found within us. If you've ever done a colors training or a Myers-Briggs type indicator training, you'll find out what your dominant personality style is. But that doesn't mean that you can't operate in a different temperament. It may not be your default or your dominant one, but if with practice and exercise, you can learn to be productive and effective in utilizing some other aspect of your personality that isn't your default. That's the same with your gender, that there are some attributes associated with gender that we can be more empathetic or take on different roles within the genders. Your birth order, the generation which you're born in has certain characteristics that you can adopt other characteristics if you were to be aware of what those are. So what I'm indicating here is there's a lot of things that make us very complicated people. Many of these different layers of this layer cake, we have a particular default or a primary a dominance, but that doesn't mean we can't take on a different personality trait or a different conflict style or a different management style as the need requires. And that's what I'm referring to when you take this perspective, that if you're back out of the situation from the really pixely down in the weeds, but back up and say, well, how is the best way for me to engage in this particular situation? And that allows you to have a little bit more emotional intelligence. So we're very complicated, but really we're looking at a cross-section of that complicated nature. So in other words, I want to have you think about how you approach the situations that you're in, and that you learn to speak in the language of the listener or learn to listen in the language of the speaker. That oftentimes I'll find myself in my dominant personality style, I would like to be communicated in a certain way, and I'd like to communicate to people in a certain way. But I recognize that not everyone appreciates that style of communication. And so I need to modify how I communicate to people to, so that I can address what works best for them. So I'm communicating in a way that they can hear and understand what I'm saying, which may require me to change the way I communicate. Does that make sense to everyone? Great. Your silence means that you agree with me here. Okay. And please feel free to
this is Julio from Puerto Rico.
Go ahead, Julio.
I think you have a real important point there. Sometimes we should learn to listen. Instead of using our dominant side, you're right on the money when you said that. Okay.
Great.
I agree with you.
And hey, this is David Foster in Nevada. I think that I'm going to second what Julio just said. And earlier, Everett said this. Listening is one of the most important things that we can do. And so often, we've all been in a meeting where you're talking to someone, and you can tell that they're thinking about what they're going to say next instead of listening to you. And that's one of the most frustrating things ever. So it's important to be an intent listener and to actually listen and to not be thinking about what you're going to say next.
You really, I'm giving to your point that you really have to sometimes control yourself and know how to listen.
Yep. Excellent point. And oftentimes I think about both on the listening side and then how we respond to that listening. That just because I have a hammer doesn't mean every situation I come in contact with is a nail. Sometimes it might require me to use something I'm not most comfortable with, which would be a wrench. And I've got to adapt to, you know, this person actually that's coming to me is a bolt and I need to use the wrench instead of the hammer. I'll get much further along using the wrench rather than the hammer. And so if you can bear with me on that analogy. But I think it's really important, both how we interact and then the listening part, and then frame your response and how you engage them based on what they need to move the situation forward. Great. So one of the thoughts I have about leadership is oftentimes it's taking that initiative when there's a gap and there's that void. And we often find this void in our rural communities, that there's this big chasm there. And I think it was mentioned earlier, maybe Kathy, you may have mentioned it, that there's just a void of leadership and that they really don't know how to go about what they addressing their needs. And so that's where I think we can step in. If we have that broader perspective, we can see how do we pull all these pieces together? What resources does this community need to thrive and to move forward, to start articulating what's important to them, what their values are? And I think that's an important role that we, in the roles that we play, both in USDA Rural Development and Extension, you know, we're not doing the work in the community, but we help the community realize their potential within. And we help them start seeing connections and opportunities and resources and facilitating the dialogue within the community that builds the relationships that are necessary to move forward in a productive way. And it makes them more resilient. And I think that's a really positive role that we play, and not necessarily doing the actual work of the community that needs to move, you know, that needs to be done to move forward, but we help them realize what needs to be done. So again, taking the initiative when there is a gap, and we can step forward into that gap and say, look, let's bring this together, let's convene. I think that was one of the things that was said earlier about holding these coalitions together and convening coalitions and facilitating these coalitions. The coalition does the work, but oftentimes we find ourselves well positioned to be a convener of bringing people together and having those dialogues. So partnerships.
Dan, this is Everett. And,
go ahead.
And that's a really important part, I think, in sort of a shifting role for a lot of my colleagues. And I see a real reluctance to be a catalyst. It's like they're sort of stuck in the rut of being order takers and not at all comfortable with stepping out and taking that initiative. But I like to view my role principally as being that of a catalyst, helping initiate.
Yes. Well said, Everett. That's, yeah. And I often ask myself, if not me, then who? If it was easy, the community would have done it a long time ago. And so it might take someone from the outside to take that difficult step to enter the fray and try to make sense of what's going on. Yes, very, very good point. So I want to talk about the partnerships. And this has just been my, I guess, experience as I've been thinking about the changes that are taking place in our country. I don't want to debate the trillions of dollars of federal deficit. We're in the hole. What we're finding, and I'm sure you're finding as well, is this reduction in funding. We're cutting back. We don't have the same resources we've had in the past. And there's a trickle-down effect. So the reality is there's less money coming from the federal government. You're probably seeing less money in resources. The state is cutting back, and so there's less money from the state, from the feds, and so consequently the local governments are feeling the pinch. A lot of the programs and things and resources they have access to come from state and federal resources, at least in Montana. And so now we're finding ourselves with increased competition for those limited resources. And so the need to partner and the need to collaborate is not that it wasn't important before, but I think it's becoming just so critical for communities to survive and to thrive in the future. I liken this to organizational hypothermia. And so if you know what hypothermia is, when your body gets really cold, all the blood goes to the core. It wants to keep the vital organs alive, and so that warmth and the blood then concentrates in the core, and it starts losing appendages. So that's where your fingers and your toes start losing blood circulation, because the blood's not traveling there. It doesn't warm your body up, and so then it gets frostbite, and it dies and falls off. I see in a very real way, we're seeing a lot of that around federal, state, and local government. that we can no longer sustain what's been done in the past, and so it's like hypothermia. We're going into the core, and we're focusing on those very core things about who we are as government. And so I like it, our local government, their core function is health, welfare, and safety. That's what they do. I think over the years, they've been a little more entrepreneurial. They've been looking at these quality of life opportunities. They've been investing in walking trails and swimming pools and some of these other things that really build a quality of life. But now what we're going to see with a reduction in resources, everything's going to collapse back to the core. They're going to be focusing primarily on sewer systems, water systems, streets, police departments, and fire departments. And some of these other things that they've been venturing out into are going to be left high and dry. So it's going to really be an interesting conversations within communities as they say, well, how do we sustain these things that we've really come to appreciate? It makes it what's worth living in our communities. I'll tell you, people don't move to a community and they say, ooh, wow, you've got a 10-year-old sewer lagoon. That's really sexy. I want to live here. They don't say that. They come to the community because of the schools, the parks, the amenities, and the recreation, the quality of life things. So I think there's a real opportunity for collaboration and partnership as we look at that donut that's now high and dry, this where the tide has now left that behind. Here's an interesting slide that our former state director at USDA would often use. And he's taken an example of this little tiny town. It's not even an incorporated community. It's just an unincorporated community of Brady in Montana. And here it shows the funding sources they received for their wastewater lagoon, some of which you recognize. But the Treasure State Endowment is a state program. CDBG, I believe, is a federal program. Montana Department of Natural Resources, and then there's two loans, a loan and a grant. So with this funding package that they received $2.7 million, we're able to keep their cost per user down to about $37 per person or per household as they contributed to into this wastewater lagoon enterprise fund. Now, if we just reduced the amount of the federal government funding by 75 from 100% to 75%, it jumps up to $53. You reduce it to 50%, now it's 70, and if you folks went away altogether, those residents would be paying $102 per month for sewer service. That helps the folks that I interact with really appreciate what it means for government investment in our local communities, and what it means when we talk about, well, you know, try not to go there. So anyway, you see what we're going at. You folks are a critical piece of the puzzle in helping these rural communities survive. That means there's more money
right there
in the communities that can circulate and invest and create jobs and opportunity. Any thoughts about this slide before I move on?
Yeah, that's an awesome slide. And, you know, I have a lot of communities in my area in southern Nevada that have such a hardcore libertarian slant that, boy, this slide would put things in perspective for them.
Yeah. And you could probably do these calculations in local communities that they can connect with and say, oh, yeah, I see how we are part of a bigger picture. Yeah. All right, so what's next here? Okay, so in many respects, I see in the past, this was the model. Local government acted in its own silo. It did its thing. We had the nonprofit community over in its silo doing its thing. And we have these local community foundations out there trying to do fundraising. I don't think that model of these three separate entities in a community is going to work in the future. Or at least the future that I see is going to require that those communities come together and work more collaboratively. And there's a connection I would like to point out to you here. The local government, if it's focused on the core issues of public health, safety, and welfare, sewer systems, water systems, police, and fire, the nonprofit community can focus on those quality of life amenities. And then how do we fund all this? And I think that comes with the community foundation. They are another entity in your community that you can connect with because they are nonpartisan. They can position themselves to be conveners. They can bring many of the stakeholders of the community together and help you facilitate these conversations about where do we go from here? What's our future? How do we leverage the opportunities we have to create a community that has a great quality of life? So if you look at that from the top view, this is what you're going to see, your classic Venn diagram. So to help you realize the value of these local community foundations, and we talked a little bit about the transfer of wealth, this wealth that exists in our communities that's being transferred from the current generation that owns this to the next generation. In Montana, most of our communities are shrinking. A lot of our communities are getting smaller in population. And those folks that own the land, most of our wealth is tied up in land. And when that couple that owns the land and their kids are scattered all across the country, the kids don't come home to farm. They've gone off to Denver, to Seattle, to Salt Lake, to Minneapolis to earn their fortune. So when that couple passes away, that farm, that wealth then is divided amongst all the siblings, never to return to that community. We have a strong tradition in Montana of exporting our wealth, be it timber or minerals or grain, our youth, and now it's going to be our wealth is going to be transferred out of the state. So here's an example of Ravalli County. It's in western Montana in the southern corner. In the next 10 years, over $550 million will be transferred from one generation to the next. And likely, the people that are receiving that wealth do not live in that county. So if this county were to work with its community foundation to connect with those folks, to talk about leaving a legacy behind, if they could just capture 5% of that wealth that's being transferred, that would equal $27 million. And they put that into an endowment that would churn out at a 5% annual distribution of over $1.3 million. Right now, there is nothing being distributed. A couple $1,000s is being distributed in that community or that county right now from the foundation. So think of what your communities could do with an annual distribution of $1.3 million. This is almost like a rally cry to the communities to start thinking we need to think differently about how we generate our revenue and how we get our resources. The old model was, is there a grant? Is there a program we can apply for? How do we tap into the federal or the state or the government to help us realize our dreams? And if we can wean them from that vision to help them start looking locally and say, how do we take care of ourselves? And if we can create the compelling argument that leaving something behind, you've raised your family, you've generated your wealth here in this community, could you leave a small portion behind so that this community can continue to thrive and survive well into the future? We don't know what the issues that are going to be facing this community in 100 years, but wouldn't it be nice if they had the resources and the capacity to address the needs that are presented to them, and that you could be a part of that legacy giving? All right, I'm sure you're all ready to write checks to your local community foundations now. So let me back up before we get to this part, because this is Paul's part. So that's really this idea of the match for a lot of these community projects. You could be a part of that. I think rural development is still a player, but how do we get additional resources? These communities don't have it unless they go out and figure out how to capture that wealth that exists there. I would feel much more comfortable knowing that we're using resources that are generated locally rather than relying upon people in Helena, which is our state capital, or in Washington, D.C., to have our best interest in mind. I think the more local control that these communities can generate from their own local resources being reinvested, I think is the future of our communities and their survival. So with that, I'm going to kick it back over to Paul.
All right, thank you, Dan. Let me just see if there's any questions for Dan before I transition into this new area about community capitals. Anything, comments, or questions that you might have for Dan? Okay, well, let me just start, and I think it's a good segue because Dan's been involved in community foundation work now for many years. This was also the result of the Horizons program that Dan had mentioned, that program funded through the Northwest Area Foundation. and many of the 35 communities that we were working with to have conversations about poverty, many of them actually ended up establishing or building the capacity of their local or regional community foundations. We now have 75 community foundations across the state of Montana. And it's just a tremendous resource for those communities. And now with this USDA RCDI grant, we have the capacity over the next 2.5 years to build curricula and ultimately to build capacity across those 75 community foundations. And I think that the important take-home message is, and I think Dan and I would also be happy to provide another webinar if any of you are interested specifically about the community foundation work, education work that we're involved in. But the take-home message there is that this community foundation education really is a leadership development tool. Again, the community foundation education, we see it as a leadership development tool because of the fact that, number one, we're engaging the community about communicating about this topic. We're asking them to engage in a conversation about a vision and then to actually execute that vision to reach out to donors, to families, to corporate sponsors for planned gifts, and to actually build those gifts into wills and trusts. The curriculum that we will be we've just received this grant in September, and we've just hired our program director for the grant now, and we will be having a series of trainings across our state in the coming throughout the grant period. But we have 7 areas that we're focusing on this community foundation work. Where the first area is just basic skills of managing a local community foundation. Number 2, engaging community members in conversations about the foundation, so a marketing piece there. Number 3, identifying and engaging local, regional, and national funding partners, so a whole chapter in this curriculum dealing with identifying and engaging funders. The 4th area is strategic grant making, how the grants are actually given back to the community once the endowment is built. The next area in the curriculum is basics of board governance, how you actually put together a board and how a board functions, the importance of bylaws and rules of procedure. And we'll have another track on leadership and team building, both for the board and across the community. And then the 7th area of the curriculum, the Community Foundation curriculum, has to do with fundraising and using transfer of wealth information to build the endowment. So it's a whole kind of transfer of wealth 101 program about asset development and fundraising efforts in a community. So again, if any of you have interest, and Kathy, I think you had expressed some interest, and if others would like, we'd be happy to come back for a follow-up webinar and go into much more detail about the Community Foundation work.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks. Let me transition now into the Community Capitals Framework, and I'm going to assume that that you've covered this in a previous webinar. Is that correct? Or isn't that a safe assumption?
The community capitals diagram, that hasn't been covered.
This hasn't been covered. Have you talked at all about the Community Capitals Framework?
I do not believe so, not in the TPOCD course or in the special topics that we've had so far.
Okay, great. Well, I know somebody had mentioned this, so I think, this is, I think for those of you that maybe have a more extensive background in community development, you may have heard of the Community Capitals Framework. Largely the work of Cornelia Flora, Mary Emery, and some others at Iowa State University when they were affiliated with the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. There's been a number of other people involved in this, developing this framework and coming up with some tools to apply it in a community context. But all this is just a way to try to understand holistically how a community functions in terms of the capital, the investment, the assets that are present in a community. Dan's going to be talking in just a few minutes about a term called appreciative inquiry, and this is just a way that we engage a community about a conversation about what's working well. Many of you may have attended a meeting where you start down the road of talking about the problems in a community, the deficits, what's not working well, maybe the crime and the teen pregnancy and drug use and drunk driving, etc. And those are topics which are, of course, important to talk about and recognize and be able to address. But if you've ever been to a meeting like that, where the focus of the meeting are those deficits, the problems, the things that aren't working well, it's really easy to leave that meeting and feel overwhelmed and depressed and not optimistic about what you can do to address and try to resolve some of those issues. The community capitals framework is one way to go about looking at a community, again, as a holistic system, but looking at the community in terms of the assets, the things that are working well, the positive aspects of a community. And all of this focuses the intersection of all of this capital in a community results in a healthy ecosystem, a vital economy, and a social well-being. So again, when you have deficits in terms of any of these areas of capital, social capital, human capital, cultural capital, which I'll define in just a second, when you have any of these, you're compromised in terms of just how that system functions and the integral nature of that community. So this information is borrowed from the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development previous webinar, but that I had attended when I first started my position here at Montana State University. But I continue to find this useful. I continue to present it to communities, and I do want to source the North Central Regional Center for coming up with this and serving as the impetus for this framework. And just want to recognize them as I go through the next few slides. Let me define here these community capitals. The first one, natural capital, which I'm sure many of you recognize. I think it's fairly intuitive. Natural capital is the water quality. Is our water pure and clean? Soil productive? Do we have a healthy biodiversity? Is the landscape healthy? Do we have productive wildlife and these kinds of things? Cultural capital are the values, symbols, language, food, customs, tradition, rituals that we encounter in a community. So this is the things we do together to celebrate each other as a community. The events we have, maybe the rodeo or the fair that's a popular attraction, to a community every year. This is another form of capital that's in a community. Human capital is the educational system that we have, the skills, the health of the community, the self-worth, the self-efficacy and self-esteem that takes place. And this leads to all kinds of things like creativity. Do we have a healthy artistic community? The quality of our teachers and mentors, both formal and informal. What sort of stock or capital do we have in our community there? Social capital, which I'm going to get back to in just a few minutes. I talked about earlier, the trust. How much trust do we have in our community? The networking and the ties that take place. The reciprocity. How willing are we to help each other, particularly in times of distress? What sort of collective identity do we have and shared sense of future? How well do we work together, and what sort of leadership qualities are exhibited? Not just the prominent business men and women or elected officials and clergy, but to what degree are youth or elderly or single mothers, for example, stepping up and involved in leadership positions across a community? And political capital is our government structures, our political connections, how much voice people have, power. Ownership is that word that Everett had mentioned earlier. All deals with political capital. And as we know, some communities, it's a very caustic environment because the political capital is lacking. And others, it's very functional. We have very high functioning governments and political interactions in our communities. And financial capital, and this is the capital that we often think of when we talk about capitalism, is the investment that takes place in our community, the savings and the grants and the bonds that we have access to in our communities, personally and also on a community level. And built capital is the infrastructure in a community, the buildings, the housing, sewers, water system, roads, telecommunications, etc. So this is an example. Again, this is from that previous presentation that the NCRCRD had provided several years ago. But this is an example of these interactions and how we can think of these capitals interacting. And this is the analogy here. A large hog processing facility, built capital, moves into a rural community that has political capital, providing jobs and adding to the county's tax base. That's financial capital. Water and sewer lines, those involve built and political capital, are run from the nearby town to the facility. Water quality issues arose from the runoff of the facility and overflow of the sewer system. That's the natural capital. Latino workers and families move into the community with educational needs, that's human capital. More money flows into the community, financial capital. A new restaurant opens, built capital. And a local organization with many volunteers, social capital, initiates Old and New Settlers Program, cultural capital. So again, you can think of really any issue as incorporating all of these capitals, and this just helps us frame, I think, the functionality of a community, thinking in terms of not just these individual capitals, but how the capitals interact in any given scenario. So framing will determine how people view the issues. And this is a quote from Reese, Framing Public Life is the publication. And the quote is, frames are organizing principles that are socially shared and persistent over time that work symbolically to meaningfully structure the social world. So again, as community members, I had asked you earlier about defining community development, that it's not just the economic or the financial capital, not just economic development, but it really is a holistic framework that we can use to look at not just the problems in our communities, but the capital, the investment, the assets that take place and that exist in our community. So what I'd like to ask all of you is to report out now and provide an example in a community you work where social capital is lacking. And the reason I'm highlighting social capital is because of this leadership issue here, which is integral to building that social capital. It's the trust that we talked about, the ability for people to help each other out, and the leadership in a community. So provide an example in a community you work where social capital is lacking. Tell us why and how other capital investments could lead to enhanced social capital. So again, when there's an investment in one of those areas of capital, it can overlap into the other area and help promote that. And we'll kind of debrief this after we hear from some of you. So let's hear from a few of you about an example where social capital is lacking, and how you think capital investment in your investment, how it could or how it has, in your experience, led to enhanced social capital.
I'm willing to give another example in the small town of Kindred, North Dakota, where they had the financial capital from various partners put together to be able to afford a very important infrastructure project. But because of, reportedly, I have not met the man, but because of one person who was an extremist, and you might call him a Tea Partier, but I mean, of that philosophy that government shouldn't be spending anything, he led a group of 50 people in a very small town to threaten the city leaders, saying that they would not do business with the city leaders in their, private businesses. And so long story short, the city council caved. The deputy sheriff had to be there to escort people to their cars because they were afraid of this kind of semi-mob that this extremist had put together. This is in a quiet, normally pleasant little Norwegian town outside of Fargo. And it was all in leadership, and the leadership of the mayor caved. The leadership of the extremists excelled. The good news is the extremists moved, so hopefully the town will be able to move forward.
What's happened as a result in terms of trust or trust and leadership in the community as a result of that?
Well, when I first started going there almost 2 years ago, I didn't realize that the community was lacking greatly in trust until I started to spend more time there and people started to open up to me, especially when the news reporter was not there at one of the meetings, and then all of this came, a floodgate of information came out. So I think the key is going to be that more newcomers are going to come because it is close enough to Fargo that young families are now being attracted to the community. And so they're going to come with a positive attitude, fresh, not the old baggage that people who are many generations from that town. So hopefully it's going to change in the future, but it's certainly not going to happen overnight. And the mayor is moving too, so the leadership on both sides will be different in the future.
So it sounds like, trust has been a critical issue in the community in terms of trying to engage, have, civil conversations. What's the role of USDA, then Rural Development, then, as a result?
Well, I personally went in there as a facilitator, just offering to help out the mayor, not realizing that all of this was going on underground. And, Renetta could speak to it because she used to live there.
Renetta, you care to share with us what's happened as a result?
Well, I don't know if I am aware of that most recent things that have been happening there, but I know from when I did live there, the community, yes, it lacked in I would say leadership and the vision of the city. There was a lot of division on almost every issue that ever came up.
And has it been resolved, or does it still exist?
Still exists. And the name kindred means they are kindred spirits, so isn't that ironic?
Yes, there's a sign coming into the city that says kindred, where kindness is a way of life.
Interesting. Well, the irony is not lost. It's, I think the message that Dan and I are trying to make here is, and if any of you are looking for that silver bullet, or that magic bullet, that's that this is the recipe to address this issue. As Dan said, if you've seen one community, you've seen one community. It's really hard to generalize because of just the complexity, the dynamics that take place in any one community, the different interests, just the geographic realities, the economic situation, etc. But the take-home message that we're trying to trying to inculcate here and get across is the importance of trying to, first of all, being conscious of these different capitals. And what we work on in our community development world is trying to enhance this social capital in a community. The leadership capacity, the trust, and the networking. There's no recipe or prescription for doing this, and it takes a long time to build these relationships, to have these conversations. But you get to it by practicing those good governance principles and some of the other tools and techniques that we're talking about here today. So I do want to recognize, I don't want to keep us over time, and recognizing here that we've got about 20 minutes left on our webinar. And so I think unless there's any other pressing comments, I'll turn it back over to Dan. Anything else that anyone would like to add before Dan takes over again?
Paul, this is Everett again, and I would just like to say that I have found that the local food development is a phenomenal topic to get communities talking about. It seems to be the one topic that doesn't have a lot of baggage. It's universal. Folks recognize the importance of it. Farmers were long ago relegated to the state of poverty, so there's no pot of gold to fight over. And it's the one topic that seems to work really well to rally folks around, to get them some experiences of success, even if it's just the initial meetings of sitting down and collaborating, and then a plan starts emerging and so forth. And it's a real foundation to begin building some social capital on.
Everett, it's a great point you made, and what I think that the take-home message there is focusing, when you are having these conversations, on the commonalities. What is it that brings us together as a community, instead of those issues that are divisive, that push us apart? And whether it's food systems or the amenities, or the fact that we care about our schools and our children, that is, I think, effective facilitation by all of you to focus a conversation and build this social capital that's so critical to empowering a community and building a thriving community. Well, with that, let me turn it over to Dan, and he'll be talking now about appreciative inquiry.
Okay, so Paul touched on this issue a little bit earlier, but we'll take a look at this slide. So what is it that you see in this slide? Does anyone want to venture a guess? That's correct. You see a black dot. This is a much better presentation live than over the phone. But so typically when I present this slide and ask the group, they usually focus in on the dot. And you'll have about a half dozen people say, I see a black dot, I see a black smudge or something. But really what eventually someone will say, I see a vast wide expanse with a small dot in the middle of it. And that's where we're getting to as this group or as the community thinks about, back to, there's a whole lot of white here that we're ignoring, and our focus naturally goes to that one blemish. And so back to Paul's conversation earlier with appreciative inquiry, what we're interested in is having communities talk about what is it that's working well in the community. And if you can have them focus on the things that are effective, that are productive, when was the last time we did something and we came together as a community, we had good communication, we were effective in our outcomes. What was that? What did it look like? How do we behave? How do we communicate with each other? It's a much more inspiring conversation. And you're bringing out the good things of the community, and you say, now how do we take those things, those attributes that we experienced previously, and apply them to this new initiative? And they're building on a past experience that was positive, rather than focusing on the negative things and say, oh gosh, we don't have this, we don't have that, we need more of this. And I blame ourselves and government often for this, because most of our grant applications, what's the first thing we ask them in a grant application? What's your need? We want you to focus in and drill down and articulate how bad is it so that you can justify the money that we plan to give you. And it creates a culture within communities to start spiraling down, thinking about all the bad things and presenting it in the most egregious way so that they can get the best opportunity for resources. So really what we're trying to do is create a more uplifting, inspiring conversation about what's working well, and let's build on that. So here's finding the bright spots. People change in the direction in which they inquire. So it stands to reason if you inquire into the negative things, then that's the direction they'll change. But if you inquire into the positive things, they'll change in a more positive direction. Discover that which is good. Discoveries build a new future where the best becomes more common, and encourage the entire community. What is working well? And this is, and I liked what was mentioned earlier about finding those things that you can bring the community around that aren't contentious. And really what you're doing is you're building a framework for the community to have a positive experience. They establish relationships. They build trust. It allows them to increase their capacity around one but fairly benign but important issue that allows them to then take on the little more challenging issue the next time. And then they build up even more capacity and more communication skills, more networks, more trust amongst themselves, which allows them to take on a more challenging. And eventually that community can grapple with some of the most challenging issues they face, whether it's racism or whatever it might be. But you don't start out in a conversation in a community and say, hey, it looks like you've got a problem with racism. Let's have a discussion about that. You won't get anywhere. But if you build upon it, eventually they'll get to that point and say, you know what, in order for us to move forward, we got to deal with this issue in our community. So that's finding those bright spots. I have a theory of change, and I'm going to kind of quickly, because we have 15 minutes, I will try not to tell all the stories, because I think there's a lot of learning in the storytelling that goes along with these principles I'm sharing with you, but I'll see if I can be strategic about it. This is my theory of change, that complex problems call for many kinds of solutions. If the solutions were easy, we would have figured it out a long time ago, is what I'm saying. So it's complicated, and so we need to look at this issue in a variety of different directions, and it may require several solutions, not just one solution. When many people come together, they develop relationships. And when you develop relationships, you develop trust. And when you have trust, that's where you can share. When you share, new ideas come out of that. So this whole thing, underlying this whole conversation, how important trust is. That's one of the foundations that you need to develop within a community for them to move forward in positive, productive communication. When people consider an issue from different points of view, they uncover common ground and find better solutions. So you can't just rely upon all like-minded people to sit down and solve complicated issues. But it's going to require a diversity of perspectives and ideas. It takes much longer. It's much more energy to work through it. But the outcome of a diverse group looking at a complicated issue, the outcome of that effort is going to be more resilient within the community. I have a great story to tell, but I'm not going to share it with you, and you'll have to call me later. When people have a voice, they are more likely to participate in carrying out the ideas of change. So that's where you generate this dialogue where people can share their ideas and thoughts, because now they have skin in the game. They have ownership, as we mentioned earlier. And when they have ownership in that conversation, that they contributed something to it, and that they can see, even if they see their idea on the sticky wall that isn't necessary to be considered, their idea was honored, it was placed up there, it was given consideration. That is helpful for people to say, you know what, I was part of this process, I need to be part of the solution. And they will lend their energy and their effort to moving the ball forward, even if it's not their idea. And then change is more likely to last when individual as well as collective action are tied together. So it's important to have individuals feeling empowered to act, but it's also important to organize this collective action. And the two of those things working together will allow you to accomplish many great things in your community. When you talk about community engagement, I want you to think about all the different sectors of your community that you need to engage to have this diverse, robust dialogue about the issues that are facing your community. whether it's creating a vision for the future, whether it's dialoguing about how do we capture this wealth, how do we create an investment and a plan and a strategy for people to feel like they can invest their wealth with us. So you look at the community, and this is not by all means a conclusive list, but it gives you an idea of the diversity that you want to consider. So at the table, when you have a convening or create some sort of a steering committee or a guiding committee to take on an initiative, think about the different sectors that are in your community, because each of them represent a value or a perspective or a sector of your community that needs to be part of that conversation. So you have youth, you have the business community, you have service groups, you have senior citizens, the newcomers, the old-timers, elected officials. All of them have a stake in this, and all of them need to be at the table to discuss it. And when you do that, you'll find that new relationships and networks will be established, which adds to the resiliency of the community. Small group action efforts take place. Changes are made by organizations because something's come out of it, and they say, you know what, we can take on this idea, this concept, and move forward with it. Policy changes take place, and then there's structural changes. The community actually changes the way it operates. It creates maybe a new group, a new organization. Something changes and shifts within that community, and that's where you're going to get that lasting change. In some of our efforts that we've done over time, we've had local governments realize the importance of this, and so they've created a community development board. Just like the planning board and the Parks and Recreation board, this board's purpose is to look at the community and how do they continue facilitating dialogue around important issues and how they build those soft skills and the leadership within the community. And it's embraced by the government, by the local government, and they expect them to work in that arena. So some of the principles make inclusivity a top priority, frame the issues in ways that are relevant for a wide variety of people. And these little things like fitness center, those are stories I am not going to tell. Use a process with neutral facilitation, ground rules, and balanced discussion. People need to feel safe if they're going to engage in a dialogue in the community. So it's important to build that trust by having a well-prepared, thought-out, facilitated process with people that don't have a dog in the fight, that they can be dispassionate and neutral and help the community dialogue about those important issues. Use a process that engages and empowers people to act and connect talk with action and change. Now here's a quick story I will share with you because I have a cool slide to go with it. There's a small town close to North Dakota, it's called Webo, and they had lost their local medical clinic. The doctor had retired and shut down his practice. And here's a little town that's isolated. They don't have any medical services, their grocery store burned down, and they thought, you know what, if we lose the school, we might as well all just pack up and move away. Because there's certain critical infrastructure, social infrastructure that your community needs to survive, one of which is a school, medical facilities, and a grocery store, to name just a few. So this had been coffee shop talk for quite a while that they needed a medical facility, they needed a medical clinic, they needed a doctor to provide basic care. But there was no way that that community was able to grapple with that concept and validate it. It was just something that was just resonating within the community, but no one felt empowered to move forward with that idea. Through the Horizons process, we had what we call study circles, which is a facilitated dialogue where community members met in small groups, facilitated discussion for multiple sessions. They came together and compared their ideas, and of the 6 groups that met, about 60 people went through the process. 5 of the 6 groups all said, we need a medical clinic. That there validated that as an issue. That brought it to the forefront and said, now we get to move forward with this idea. They created a task force to address that. And within a year, they connected with the city government, found a lot to place this clinic. They connected with the county government, who bought and moved this building here from a small town in North Dakota. They connected with Fish Wildlife Parks, a state agency, because where the city wanted to locate this clinic was actually on a tennis court that had been abandoned by the city. but it was a park that was funded by the Fish and Wildlife Parks. So they had to agree to the fact that the city was going to do a land swap with another site that was more conducive to a park and and built new tennis courts. So long story short, they worked with the local, county, state governments to bring this facility in. They worked with the local hospital in a neighboring community in Glendive to bring a doctor over. So within 6 months, well, I guess it was 9 months after they had validated this as an issue, they now had a clinic, where this would been something in the community that had been talked about for 2 years prior. It takes that catalyst where the community comes together and validates it to then the energy can then focus around, let's make this happen. Then tell the story. Let me quickly here. Tell the story, and you've built now an infrastructure, a social infrastructure, that they say, wow, we got that done in 9 months. What's the next thing on our list? And it builds this momentum, a positive momentum within the community that they start addressing more and more complicated and complex issues, and they get really excited and motivated to create a future that they desire. So bottom line is be transparent in what you do, be inclusive with many people in the community, and try to select the diversity of ideas and thoughts, not just, so the diversity. I will skip this slide. It's a really cool slide, but we don't have the time. I want to talk a little bit about vision. This is a phrase that I've coined. I don't know if it's unique to me, but it was an epiphany that I had in a meeting. It's investment follows vision. And this ties a lot, I think, to what we've been talking about the whole day. If a community can articulate a vision, can demonstrate the capacity of working around that vision and can deliver on that vision, people within that community say, you know what, I can buy off on that. I can see how my time, my energy, my resources will make a difference. And they're willing to commit to something. And this is what I find in a lot of communities that don't have any sort of strategic plan or vision or idea of where they want to go in the future. They're just kind of floating along in the stream of life. But if a community were to say, you know what, we need to be in control of our destiny. We want to achieve our future by design rather than by default. And if they can organize themselves around that, that's a compelling argument for someone that you're saying, look, as you do your estate planning, think about your community. Think about leaving something behind to them. Think about what your contribution can do to help them reach their vision. And that will give those folks in the community they want to give something to the community because they see how their contribution will actually make a difference, will have an impact. If the community is basically, flatlined and is passive, who's going to want to invest in it? Who's going to want to leave a legacy gift behind because they think these guys don't have their act together? I'll give it to my alma mater. They've got their act together. But if you can generate and inspire the community to say, you know what, we need to move forward. We need to create a reason why people want to invest in us. That's going to create resources and bring opportunity to communities. So this is a slide. This is probably what a lot of your communities look like. You've got well-meaning groups and organizations working in a variety of different directions with no real structure or framework. The red dots represent free radicals. These are community members that are really committed to the community, but they're not joiners. And they're just out there popping around the community, but there's really no structure or organization to what's happening. But if you can align the groups around a vision and you can solicit the help and support of these free radicals, say, you know what, you don't have to join our group, but we're sponsoring the big steak fry at the rodeo this weekend. Could you help us at the steak fry? They'll likely jump on the opportunity. They want to help out, but they're not necessarily joiners. Now you've given them an opportunity to participate and be engaged because they say, you know what, this money that we're raising, it's going to help build the community center. People will come, they'll donate their time and energy and resources because now they see how their contribution is going to make a difference. If you just say, we're just building our coffers to do something good in the future, is not inspiring enough. This is a quote from Martin Luther King, which I think is very relevant here. If you want to move people, it has to be towards a vision that's positive for them, that taps important values and gets them something they desire. And it has to be presented in a way that they feel compelled to follow. And I think he's articulated very well there this whole investment follows vision concept, that we've got to help people see the vision, that's going to be positive for them. It taps into their values, and then present it in a way that they feel compelled to follow. Oh my goodness. All right. This is a model that we use for strategic planning. Strategic Leadership's Incorporated, it's the model that they use. So I would encourage you to go to their website. But it's a strategic planning model where you identify what is it we're doing today, where's our current situation, where are we going to be in the future, what's driving us in this direction. If you're going to articulate those drivers, then that helps you identify what's the barriers that are preventing us from accomplishing that, and then what are the critical success factors. What has to happen in order for us to move forward? So that's a model that we use in working with communities. And I think I'm looking at my clock, and I've got 1:59. So I think we'll call it good there. There's our contact information for Paul and I. And I don't know if the room's going to shut off in another minute, but if I'm willing to answer any questions or take any comments, if you want to stick around and continue dialoguing.
I'd just like to add really quickly, this is Chelsea. I'm just going to post the link to a survey so that you can evaluate our speakers and thank them also if you want to. And also thank you from me, Paul and Dan, for facilitating this today.
You're welcome. It's been our pleasure.
And Paul and Dan, what I can do is I can stop the recording, but you can go ahead and continue answering questions or whatever, if that's fine with you.
Great.
Okay?
Happy to.
Okay.
Can I ask if